What's the see, what con thì always friendly. What's có siêu sủng thú anytime để chào cho siêu. À.
Okay, we'll start with the Mangala Charan. Om Majnana Timirandasya, Jnananjana Shalakaya, Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namah, Sri Chaitanya Manu Vishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale, Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam, Vandeyam Sri Guru Sri Yudapadakamalam, Sri Guru Vaishnavascha, Sri Rupam Sagarjatam Sagana Raghunathan Vitam Stamsa Jivam, Sadvaitam Saudutam Paljana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam, Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Sri Vishaka Nitamscha. हे कृष्ण करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगतपति गोपीशा गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमस्ते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि पंचकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्यो च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री द्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय Hare Krishna. So today we'll continue with chapter 1 from the book Beyond Birth and Death. So this chapter 1 is titled We Are Not This Body. So this, I guess this is our third session of this small book. So in the previous session we stopped at this last paragraph. The body is composed of senses, and the senses are always hungry after the objects. It is about how vulnerable. It is about the vulnerability of the embodied soul in terms of being subservient to the material senses, and the material senses are themselves subservient to sense objects. Sense objects are nothing but dead matter, but we as spirit souls who are supposed to be superior to everything that exists in the material world, we, due to our embodied condition, we are actually subservient to dead matter, the sense objects. So in the last session, it ended at this paragraph. So we'll continue with this shloka here from 2.67 Gita. Indriyanam hi charatam yanmano anuvidiyate tad asya harati prajnam vayurnavam ivam basi. So in 2.67, as a strong wind sweeps away a boat on the water, even one of the roaming senses on which the mind focuses can carry away a man's intelligence. So, as mentioned in the previous sessions also, the Gita is actually very closely related to Katha Upanishad. Of course, in Gita Mahatmya, Shloka 6 of Gita Mahatmya, it is stated that the Gita is the essence of all Upanishads. Still, the Katha Upanishad is the one which can be found, the contents of the Katha Upanishad can be found prominently in the contents of the Gita. So in Katha Upanishad, there is this chariot metaphor known as Ratha Kalpana. So whenever we see the cover page of the Gita, usually we see Lord Krishna and Arjuna riding the chariot. So even in the Radha Kalpana, it illustrates the hierarchy starting from the spirit soul to material senses and sense objects. So the spirit soul is equated to the passenger of the chariot. So the passenger of the chariot should be the master of everything, and followed by, so the spirit soul occupies the topmost position in the hierarchy, followed by intelligence represented by the charioteer, the chariot driver, and then the the mind is represented by the reins, which are being held by the chariot driver, and the horses refer to the material senses. And these horses, they are always running behind sense objects. So for a liberated person, the spirit soul will be the master. But for conditioned souls, it is the other way around. So the material senses, whenever they run behind sense objects, so actually the material senses become subservient to the sense objects, and the mind becomes subservient to the material senses. Then because of that, intelligence itself becomes subservient to the mind, and therefore the passenger or the spirit soul, who is supposed to be the topmost in the hierarchy, the spirit soul becomes subservient to all the lower elements. So that is why even in Gita chapter 6, Dhyana Yoga, in verses 33 onwards, Arjuna himself complains about how fragile, how vulnerable the mind is. It keeps flickering, and it is very difficult to control the mind. So whenever the horses, according to the chariot metaphor or rather Kalpana, when the horses run wild behind the sense objects, then even the chariot driver, intelligence, loses control. When that happens, we know what happens to the passenger or the spirit soul. So even in verses 2.62 and 63 of the Gita, in those verses, the Supreme Lord talks about how a spirit soul is led towards the path of total destruction merely because of contemplation on sense objects. So in 2.62, the verse starts with Jayato Vishnu. So beginning with contemplation on sense objects, gradually, the process gradually leads towards total destruction. So in 2.63, the verse ends with Buddhi Nashat Pranashyati. When intelligence is lost, it leads to total destruction. So even those verses, 2.62 and 63, they kind of follow, they are quite similar to the Radha Kalpana chariot metaphor. So as a strong wind sweeps away a boat on the water, even one of the roaming senses on which the mind focuses can carry away a man's intelligence. Unless all of the senses are engaged in the service of the Lord, even one of them engaged in sense gratification can deviate the devotee from the path of transcendental advancement. As mentioned in the life of Maharaj Ambrisha, all of the senses must be engaged in consciousness, for that is the correct technique for controlling the mind. So we also know regarding this Navavida Bhakti, which consists of the 9 processes of Bhakti. So in Srila Prabhupada, he mentions that one can attain perfection even by conducting one of the processes. In Srila Prabhupada's purports, he gives the example of Maharaj Parikshit, who attained perfection simply by listening, Shravanam, and Sukadeva Goswami attained perfection through Kirtanam by speaking the Bhagavatam, and many other personalities, many other exalted personalities, great devotees, they attain perfection by executing even one of the 9 processes, and even even each of the processes, they often involve more than one of the senses. Like even in the example of a japa, so we chant so that we can hear the sound. So we are actually engaging more than one of our senses. So similarly, it is best to take up a variety of these processes, though we may not be able to execute all 9 processes depending on time, place, and circumstance. So we can actually take up even the simple processes so that most of our material senses are constantly engaged in the process of bhakti. So therefore, it is, though it has been mentioned that one can attain perfection simply by even simply by being engaged in one of the processes, still it is best to be engaged in multiple processes depending on time, place, and circumstances. Because for some processes like uh, archanam, archanam is one process which requires a lot of paraphernalia. So depending on the place and circumstance, we may not have that much paraphernalia, and therefore, if we only have our bead bag, so it is best to just chant. So it is not really necessary to always conduct all 9 processes, but still the main point is to ensure that all our senses are engaged in most of these processes, most of the bhakti processes, as much as possible in order to avoid all sorts of deviation. And the more we are engaged, the more we can realize the taste of Krishna consciousness. It is imperative that we learn how to control the senses. The name Goswami is given to someone who has learned how to master the senses. Go means senses and Swami means controller. So one who can control the senses is to be considered a Goswami. So the person, the uh, an individual who is able to control his senses is Goswami. However, Krishna is known as Rishikesha, or the master of the senses. So since he is the master of the senses, we should engage all our senses in the service of the master of the senses. Krishna indicates that one who identifies with the illusory material body cannot establish himself in his proper identity as spirit soul. Bodily pleasure is flickering and intoxicating, and we cannot actually enjoy it because of its momentary nature. Actual pleasure is of the soul, not the body. So that is why it all starts from the very first step of self-realization. So self-realization simply means realizing the self. So it is important to clearly understand what is meant by the self here. Self refers to the spirit soul. Though it appears to be very simple, but in order to practice it in our daily life, it is very complicated due to our conditioned nature. And the more we try, the more the 3 puppeteers, the 3 modes of material nature, try to uh, they try to somehow sabotage our plans. But that doesn't mean that we should give up. The more we face challenges, the more we should endeavor sincerely. So since our identity is that we are all spirit souls, we can never attain pleasure. We can never attain real pleasure by uh, being engaged in material sense gratification, because the more we try to engage in material sense gratification, it simply shows that we are still identifying ourselves with the body. However, our true identity is that we are spirit souls, and therefore, the more we tend to engage in material sense gratification, uh, we will only end up realizing that we uh, we actually end up getting more and more frustrated, like as mentioned in the 2 verses from Gita 2.62 and 63. ध्यायतो विषयान् पुंसां संगतेषु उपजायते संगत संजयते कामात् काम क्रोधो अभिजायते. This is from Gita 2.62. Contemplation on sense objects leads to attachment. Then attachment leads to lust. When lust is unfulfilled, it leads to anger. So this is all because of identifying with the material senses, identifying with ourselves with the material body. So bodily pleasure is flickering and intoxicating, and we cannot actually enjoy it because of its momentary nature, and also because we ourselves, as spirit souls, we can never derive satisfaction from this momentary pleasures. Actual pleasure is of the soul, not the body. We have to mold our lives in such a way that we will not be diverted by bodily pleasure. If somehow we are diverted, it is not possible for us to establish our own consciousness in its true identity beyond the body. So the more we are deluded trying to enjoy material sense gratification, it will only lead to more frustration because we simply cannot change our original constitutional position as spirit souls. So the more we try to derive pleasure from material sense gratification by running after sense objects, which is nothing but date matter, so that date matter cannot give satisfaction to our conscious spirit soul. Also regarding the momentary nature of material sense gratification, from Gita 5.22, Ye samsparjao boga dukkha yone evate adi antavanta konteya nateshu ramate buddha. An intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery, which are due to contact with the material senses. So material sense gratification is sure to bring misery. Though there may be momentary pleasures, but it ends up in misery because ultimately it further leads to material entanglement. We get entangled further in this material world because every second that we waste in material sense gratification, we also have to understand that whatever we do now in our present life, especially after getting this wonderful human form of life, every second that we waste in material sense gratification, we are actually preparing for a much more degraded form of life. The human form of life is the most exalted position in the 84 lakh species of material bodies. And if we don't know how to appreciate that, then there's no chance to be elevated to higher forms of life. We are only going to be degraded to lower forms of life in such a way that we won't be having any more opportunities to be even acquainted to Krishna consciousness in our future lives. So it is best to fully utilize this wonderful opportunity in order to disentangle ourselves from this material entanglement. The more we are deluded and the more time we waste through material sense gratification, it only results in misery, not just in this lifetime, but the more we get entangled, we are likely to get further degraded bodies in the future, and will be stuck in this incessant cycle of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. So an intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery, which are due to contact with the material senses. O son of Kunti, such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them. Material sense pleasures are due to contact with the material senses, which are all temporary because the body itself is temporary. So our original identity is that we are eternal spirit souls, and therefore neither this temporary material body and neither the material sense objects, which are nothing but date matter, those objects can never give us true pleasure to our spirit soul. A liberated soul is not interested in anything which is temporary. Knowing well the joys of transcendental pleasures, how can a liberated soul agree to enjoy false pleasures? So in this is the reason why we though we may realize it, but still we do not truly understand the crux of it, because whether it is the theist or atheist, the atheist, of course, they are always known for making all sorts of ridiculous comments, though they think that they are great intellectuals, but they only end up in making all sorts of ridiculous comments because they say that if God really exists, then why doesn't he make this place full of happiness? So for such people, most probably they are the ones who don't even know how many chapters are there in the Bhagavad Gita, because the Supreme Lord himself clearly says that in Gita 8.15, he clearly makes it very clear that this material world is Dukkalayam Ashashwatam. Then he proceeds to explain further regarding the nature of this material world in 8.16, 8.17, and so on, even regarding the calculation of Brahma's lifetime. So he makes it very clear that in all the three divisions, upper, middle, and lower, in all the 14 planetary systems, all these places are Dukkalayam, part of the material universe. So none of the living entities who are in these 14 planetary systems are exempt from experiencing misery. But in 8.21, in Gita 8.21, the Supreme Lord says, Avyakto akshara ityuktas tamao paramam gatim yam prapya na nivaltante taddama paramam mama. So in 8.21, the Supreme Lord says, though this material world is a place of misery, there is another eternal world, the spiritual world, which is full of bliss. Those who enter it do not return to this Dukkalayam. So the Supreme Lord makes it very clear for us to understand, but those who uh, do not follow the proper process of receiving the knowledge from a bona fide parampara, so it is very difficult for them to understand this. And another reason is also because of the failure to understand their true constitutional position, because of the prominent Mayavada ideology, which propagates this foolish notion of spirit souls being equal to the Supreme Lord. So they only aggravate the material misery of conditioned souls to such an extent where the deluded conditioned souls actually think that they can tell the Supreme Lord about what he should do. So only if we understand that we are extremely minute living entities, and we are meant to be subservient to the Supreme Lord, only then we will be able to understand the confidential knowledge that has been imparted by the Supreme Lord. So anything that is any sort of pleasure that is derived from material sense gratification, it can never give us eternal bliss. So since the material sense pleasures originate from this material world, just like everything that is material in this material world, so even the pleasures which originate from material sense gratification, they are also momentary, and they can never give us eternal bliss. We can realize that only by realizing our true self and our true constitutional position as the eternal servants of the Supreme Lord. So since we are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, just like how the branches and leaves of a tree are part and parcel of the root of the tree, the tree gets nourished, the branches and leaves get nourished only by watering the root. So only by being engaged in devotional service, only by satisfying the root, our Supreme Father, so only by satisfying him, we as spirit souls can derive eternal bliss. Actual pleasure is of the soul, not the body. We have to mold our lives in such a way that we will not be diverted by bodily pleasure. If somehow we are diverted, it is not possible for us to establish our consciousness in its true identity beyond the body. Verses 2.44 and 45 from the Gita. भोगेश्वर्य प्रसक्तानां तया पालचेत्सां व्यवसायात्मिका बुद्धिः समादाहुन विधीयते त्रैगुण्य विषया वेद निस्त्रैगुण्यो भवार्जुन निर्द्वंदो नित्य सत्वस्थो निर्योग क्षेम आत्मावान. In the minds of those who are too attached to sense enjoyment and material opulence, and who are bewildered by such things, the resolute determination for devotional service to the Supreme Lord does not take place. The Vedas deal with the subject of the three modes of material nature. Rise above these modes, O Arjuna. Be transcendental to all of them. Be free from all dualities and from all anxieties for gain and safety, and be established in the self. So those who are too obsessed with material sense gratification, they can never uh, have the resolute determination for devotional service to the Supreme Lord, because they are two opposing ends. Because on one hand, when we are obsessed with material sense gratification, we want to satisfy the body, the material body, which is temporary, and we are neglecting the eternal spirit soul. If we really want to satisfy ourselves, if we want to satisfy our spirit soul, so devotional service is the only way, because being part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, as the Supreme Lord himself says in Gita 15.7, we as individual spirit souls, we are eternal fragmental parts of the Supreme Lord, and only if we satisfy him through devotional service, only when the root is satisfied, only then we, the parts and parcels, we can be satisfied. In 2.45, the Supreme Lord talks about the Vedas deal with the subject of the three modes of material nature. Rise above these modes, O Arjuna, be transcendental to all of them. Be free from all dualities and from all anxieties for gain and safety, and be established in the self. So in 2.45, the Supreme Lord actually touches on this subject related to the three modes of material nature. Though it is a very prominent topic throughout the Gita, Lord Krishna talks about it in starting from chapter 2 itself. And then we can see that the same topic is being touched upon in all the subsequent chapters, almost in all the chapters. And then there is one specific chapter dedicated to the specifically for the topic on the three modes of material nature in chapter 14. And even after chapter 14, there are many other aspects related to the three modes of material nature, which are discussed in chapters 17 and 18. So understanding the notion of the three modes of material nature is extremely important in order to it is important so that we can clearly understand our material disease. So only by understanding the root cause of our material disease, only then we can understand the remedy for it. And as the Supreme Lord himself says, we have to transcend beyond the three modes. Even the mode of goodness is not good enough. We still have to transcend beyond the modes, because as the Supreme Lord also highlights in verse 14.10, he emphasizes regarding the competition between the three puppeteers. He highlights regarding the competition between the three modes of material nature. Even for someone who is situated in the mode of goodness, still that person is vulnerable, because the modes of passion and ignorance are likely to take control of him, because there's always this competition between these three modes. Though the mode of goodness is purer than passion and ignorance, still, even for a person who is fully in the mode of goodness, he is still vulnerable towards experiencing maybe even a temporary fall down. And therefore, it is safe to rise above all three modes and to be transcendental to all of them. So that is the best way for gain and safety. And how do we transcend beyond the three modes? The Supreme Lord himself says in Gita 14.26, Mamchayo Vyabhicharena Bhakti Yogena Sevate Sagunan Samati Jaitan Brahma Vuyaya Kalpate. So in verse 14.26, the Supreme Lord makes it very clear, Mamchayo Avyabhicharena, Bhakti Yogena Sevate. He did not say Karma Yogena Sevate or Jnana Yogena Sevate. He did not talk about other yoga system. Even in chapter 6, which is titled Dhyana Yoga, the Supreme Lord concludes chapter 6 by saying that the topmost yogi is the Bhakti Yogi. So the Supreme Lord has made it very clear, and therefore it is best that we simply follow his instructions without wasting the limited amount of time that we have. The word Veda means book of knowledge. So the root word is actually from the word with, meaning to know. So the Vedas, it actually refers to the entire branch of knowledge. Veda means it refers to the entire epistemology of all branches of knowledge. And prior to the so-called modern education system, the Vedas were sufficient to supply all the different types of material knowledge. And the Vedic education system was such that though material knowledge was also imparted through various fields like Ayurveda, Dhanurveda, and many other branches, still they were all consistently connected, and they culminated in promoting spiritual knowledge. However, in the current so-called modern education system, it only promotes the material knowledge. It does not address the problems which are related to the spirit soul, and that's why the so-called modern education system, it only helps us to become better than cats and dogs in the business of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. The so-called modern education system does not address the real problems, like how can we liberate ourselves from the cycles of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. So whatever material knowledge and material opulence that we get, it is all restricted to this limited period of time in which we are occupying this particular material body. The moment our spirit soul quits this material body, whatever knowledge that we have acquired from whatever prestigious university, so everything becomes worthless. But the more we acquire spiritual knowledge, the more we progress in our spiritual journey, that will help us to liberate ourselves from this cycle of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. There are many books of knowledge which vary according to the country, population, environment. In India, the books of knowledge are referred to as the Vedas. In the West, they are called the Old Testament and New Testament. The Mohammedans accept the Quran. What is the purpose for all these books of knowledge? They are to train us to understand our position as pure soul. So, as we have seen in this chapter itself, the very first step in self-realization is to realize that we are spirit souls, and therefore we should get rid of this identification of ourself as the material body. So gradually we have to get rid of identifying ourselves in terms of the various material designations, and still, however, it should culminate in understanding about our eternal constitutional position. Realization of the self, that we are spirit souls, is just the first step. If it stops right there without culminating in devotional service, because if once we understand that we are spirit souls, okay, fine, that is just the first step, but we should progress further to inquire about the origin of the spirit soul. So once we understand that we are spirit souls, okay, fine, then the next logical question is to inquire about what is the origin of the spirit soul. Even that has been made very clear by the Supreme Lord in Gita 15.7, where he says, Mamayavanso Jivaloki Jivabhuta Sanatana. Manashasthani Prakrishtani Karshati. So in that verse, the Supreme Lord clearly says that all spirit souls, all the living entities are my eternal fragmental parts, but they are suffering due to the conditioned nature in this material world, due to the senses, which include the mind. So after understanding that we are spirit souls, we also have to understand that we, the individual spirit souls, we originated from the Supreme Lord, and therefore, by understanding that we are like branches and leaves of the same tree, we have to work towards satisfying the root of the tree, and we can only satisfy the root. We can only satisfy the Supreme Lord by watering the root, and that is through devotional service. So only if the first step uh, in realizing the self culminates in devotional service, only then we can cure our material disease. Their purpose is to restrict bodily activities by certain rules and regulations, and these rules and regulations are known as codes of morality. So in all the scriptures, though even for all the other religions, in all the scriptures, there are codes of morality. There are the list of do's and don'ts. However, there was one famous personality who was manufactured as a Mahatma. He, in his so-called commentary to Gita, he said that the Bhagavad Gita is not a book of do's and don'ts. So this is the problem with those who do not acquire knowledge from the bona fide parampara. Rather, they tend to think that they themselves can replace an entire parampara. And that's why Srila Prabhupada has made it very clear that we should acquire knowledge from bona fide parampara, and it is best to study the commentary of the bona fide acharyas. The Bible, for instance, has 10 commandments intended to regulate our lives. The body must be controlled in order for us to reach the highest perfection, and without regulative principles, it's not possible to perfect our lives. The regulative principles may differ from country to country or from scripture to scripture, but that does not matter, for they are made according to the time and circumstances and the mentality of the people. But the principle of regulated control is the same. Similarly, this government sets down certain regulations to be obeyed by its citizens. There is no possibility of making advancement in government or civilization without some regulations. So interestingly, many of the self-proclaimed intellectuals, they often come up with this nonsensical argument that it is my life, so I'm free to do whatever I want. You only live once, so do whatever you wish. So they come up with all these nonsensical statements without realizing that we we are not even free to do as we wish in our daily lives. We have to follow the rules and regulations. Even from the material point of view, we have to follow the rules and regulations uh, that has that have been laid out by the government, even by the local government. So these self-proclaimed intellectuals, they won't they wouldn't dare to violate these rules, but they'll come up with nonsensical statements like, I'm free to do whatever I want. In the previous verse, Sri Krishna tells Arjuna that the regulative principles of the Vedas are meant to control the three modes of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. However, Krishna is advising Arjuna to establish himself in his pure constitutional position as spirit soul, beyond the dualities of material nature. So even the Karma Kanda portions of the Vedas, they are still related to the material modes. They are still contained within the topics related to the material modes. And that's why even for someone who attains the position of total goodness, not pure goodness, not Shuddha Sattva, but for someone who is fully in the mode of goodness, even for such a person, he can only get elevated to the heavenly planets, meaning that even such a person will only be still bound within this material universe simply by getting elevated to the higher planets, that is not going to solve our problem. We have to liberate ourselves from this entire material creation. We have to attain the spiritual world. So that's why it is important to transcend the three modes through Bhakti Yoga. As the Supreme Lord himself says, Bhakti Yogena Sevate. As we have already pointed out, these dualities, such as heat and cold, pleasure and pain, arise due to the contact of the senses with their objects. In other words, they are born of identification with the body. Krishna indicates that those who are devoted to enjoyment and power are carried away by the words of the Vedas, which promise heavenly enjoyment by sacrifice and regulated activity. Enjoyment is our birthright, for it is the characteristic of the spirit soul. But the spirit soul tries to enjoy materially, and this is the mistake. So, more specifically, here spirit soul specifically refers to the conditioned souls who are subservient to the three modes of material nature due to the conditioning by the three modes. The conditioned souls are deluded into thinking that they can enjoy through material sense gratification. And regarding the karma kanda portions of the Vedas, they promise heavenly enjoyment by sacrifice and regulated activity. Though those parts are actually prescribed in the Vedas, still they come under the category of fruitive activity. And though it is not actually forbidden, even the fruitive activities are still very much in line with the scriptural injunctions. But still, for a person who is truly self-realized, he would understand that merely by getting elevated to a few upper planets and simply to enjoy for a limited period of time, that is not a very wise thing to do, and therefore it is not advisable for us to waste our present human form of life by being engaged in these fruitive activities, because the Supreme Lord also makes it very clear in Gita 9.20 and 9.21 about what happens to those who are engaged in the karma kanda fruitive activities. They do get elevated to the heavenly planets. However, they still have to return to this middle planet after enjoying all the rewards of their accumulated piety. They still have to return to this middle planet. So it is really not worth to waste our precious human form of life by being engaged in the karma kanda activities. Rather, we can simply follow the instructions of the Supreme Lord himself, as he has made it clear in Gita 14.26, Bhakti Yogena Sevate. So we just have to focus on Bhakti Yoga to transcend all the three modes. Only by doing that, we can elevate ourselves to the spiritual world. Everyone is turning to material subjects for enjoyment and is compiling as much knowledge as possible. Someone is becoming a chemist, physicist, politician, artist, or whatever. Everyone knows something of everything or everything of something, and this is generally known as knowledge. But as soon as we leave the body, all of this knowledge is vanquished. In a previous life, one may have been a great man of knowledge, but in this life, he has to start again by going to school and learning how to read and write from the beginning. Whatever knowledge was acquired in the previous life is forgotten. The situation is that we are actually seeking eternal knowledge, but this cannot be acquired by this material body. We are all seeking enjoyment through these bodies, but bodily enjoyment is not our actual enjoyment. It is artificial. We have to understand that if we want to continue in this artificial enjoyment, we will not be able to attain our position of eternal enjoyment. So whatever material sense gratification that we derive from material sense objects, which are nothing but dead matter, they can only give us momentary pleasure. So without realizing this simple fact, there's no point in blaming the Supreme Lord and saying that if God really exists, why he doesn't make this world a happy place. He has made it very clear that this place is meant to be Dukkalayam Ashashwatam, but the spiritual world is full of eternal bliss. So only by understanding these basic facts, we'll be able to identify the root cause of all our material miseries. And it is not very difficult because the Supreme Lord has made it very clear. He has made it very easy for us through the teachings imparted in the Bhagavad Gita. So only that spiritual knowledge can cure our material disease. And regarding knowledge, especially the material knowledge imparted by all the so-called academic institutions, though they may help with our material life, they help to train us about how we can become better than cats and dogs in the business of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. They can never cure our material disease. They can never help to liberate us from this incessant cycle of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. And whatever material knowledge that is accumulated in this present life will be forgotten in the next life. Even whatever material knowledge that we accumulated in our previous life, that has been forgotten in this life. So there's also this story about the rich man who was born as a cobbler in his next life. So there was this very rich man who owned a very palatial house, and his entire family was very wealthy. And after his demise, he took birth in the form of in the body of a cobbler. And one day he had the chance to go near his palatial house, which was under his name in his previous life. So he actually wanted to enter the house because when he saw that house, he could remember that he was the owner of this house in his previous life. But when he tried to enter, he was attacked and humiliated by the present owner of the house, who was none other than his own son. And even the security guards, they insulted him. So that is the nature of everything that is material in this material world. Whatever material opulence that we gain, nothing matters, because the moment we leave this present material body, everything becomes useless. So without realizing that, we are wasting our time, we are wasting this precious human form of life by succumbing to the the desires for material sense gratification. And even regarding material knowledge, knowledge itself is a very subjective matter, because the general perception is that knowledge is whatever we gain from the academic institutions, the so-called academic institutions, but they only help us to survive in our material life. They do not address any of the real problems of our life. They do not address the problems faced by us as spirit souls. Therefore, the Supreme Lord himself has defined about what is knowledge in Gita 13.8 to 13.12. In Gita chapter 13, the chapter actually starts with a question by Arjuna. He asks the Supreme Lord Krishna about 6 subject matters. He asked the Supreme Lord about what is meant by Prakriti, Purusha, Kshetra, Kshetrajna, Jnanam, Nyayam. So Arjuna wants to know more about 6 subject matters: Prakriti, Purusha, Prakriti and the enjoyer; Kshetra, Kshetrajna, the field and the know of the field; Jnanam, Nyayam, knowledge and object of knowledge. So in these verses 13.8 to 13.12, the Supreme Lord specifies 20 aspects related to knowledge. And even in the purport, Srila Prabhupada actually explains in detail, like almost one paragraph for each aspect. So in these verses from 13.8 to 13.12, the Supreme Lord says, humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, acharya upasanam, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home, and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization and philosophical search for the absolute truth. So there are 20 aspects highlighted by the Supreme Lord. All these I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever there may be is ignorance. So if you observe carefully in these 20 aspects highlighted by the Supreme Lord, many aspects are actually clearly in contradiction with whatever we learn as material knowledge from the so-called academic institutions. For example, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification. In our so-called material knowledge, what we learn is that it is about the ways to accumulate more and more material wealth. But no matter how much material wealth that we accumulate, everything becomes useless the moment we leave the body. Just like what happened in the case of the rich man who became a cobbler in his next life. So whatever material wealth that he had accumulated, it was passed on to his son. And when he returned to his palatial house, when he tried to enter, since he was born as a cobbler, so he himself was insulted, and they all tried to chase him away. So renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, this is what is advocated by spiritual knowledge. But in the material knowledge that is imparted by the so-called academic institutions, they propagate the exact opposite. So the material knowledge, it only ends up aggravating our material disease. Though it is important for us to earn a living, still it is best if we try to satisfy, try to fulfill our bare minimum necessities, and it is just to keep going because we cannot simply liberate ourselves the moment we attain self-realization. We cannot simply liberate ourselves and attain the spiritual world. It is a gradual process, and therefore we have to focus on our material life. But at the same time, it is important that we are not too obsessed with the material opulence to the point where we start forgetting about our true self, about our identity as spirit souls. And that's why the Supreme Lord makes it very clear in Gita 8.7 when he says, Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu mam anusmarya yujyacha. Mai arpita manobuddhir mame vaishasya asamshya. So that instruction is given to Arjuna, who is a Kshatriya. So the Supreme Lord says, therefore always remember me and keep fighting. As a Kshatriya, Arjuna's duty was to fight, and the Supreme Lord said that Arjuna should always remember the Supreme Lord and keep fighting, to keep doing his duty. The same applies to us. We are also fighting against this ocean of material miseries. So we have to remember the Supreme Lord always, and at the same time also be engaged in our material duties in order to cross over this ocean of material existence. So that is only possible. We will attain the right knowledge only from spiritual knowledge. Perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease. So even this aspect is something that is completely absent from the syllabus of whatever material branch of knowledge imparted by the so-called academic institutions. Apart from that, there are also aspects like accepting the importance of self-realization. So this is another important aspect that is not at all addressed by the material branches of knowledge, philosophical search for the absolute truth. Now, regarding this, even in the so-called spiritual knowledge or schools of thought, there are many misleading schools of thought which uh, mislead the general public about the notion of the absolute truth, simply because they do not follow the authentic scriptures. From the authentic scriptures, like the Srimad Bhagavatam, it has been clearly stated that there are 3 levels of realization of the absolute truth, and Bhagavan realization is the topmost. So that we can easily find from the authentic scriptures. But still, in many uh, other schools of thought, they mislead the general public simply because they do not refer to the authentic scriptures. So even when it comes to spiritual knowledge, there are certain obstacles. Still, simply by following a bona fide parampara, we can get the right knowledge. So whatever we see as knowledge being propagated by the so-called academic institutions, they can only fulfill our material needs, and everything becomes useless the moment we leave this body, which is sure to happen. Even the modern scientists and even for doctors who are really, they are engaged in a very noble profession, but even they have to understand that they themselves cannot live forever, though they are involved in the profession of saving lives, but even they themselves cannot live forever. And therefore, it is important for everyone to understand that um, for everyone to understand the importance of perceiving the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease. So these important topics, these important aspects uh, are not addressed at all by the material uh, branches of knowledge in the academic institutions. But the Supreme Lord has made it very clear that only these 20 aspects are regarded as true knowledge. Only these aspects which can be understood through spiritual knowledge, only these can give us the important knowledge that we require for the self, for us as spirit souls. Apart from that, everything that we gain from material knowledge, those are only meant for our material needs, uh, which actually become null and void the moment we leave this material body. So everything that is material actually does not matter at all, because the moment the spirit soul leaves this temporary material body, everything that we have accumulated, even the material knowledge, becomes useless. So the only way for us to uh, guide ourselves in our journey towards the spiritual world is to um, be engaged in the accumulation of spiritual knowledge. Though it is important to gain material knowledge for our material needs, at the same time, we should not be too obsessed with fulfilling our material needs. We also have to realize that we as spirit souls, we can solve our true problems uh, only by uh, only by accumulating spiritual knowledge. The body must be considered a diseased condition. A diseased man cannot enjoy himself properly. A man with jaundice, for instance, will taste sugar candy as bitter, but a healthy man can taste its sweetness. In either case, the sugar candy is the same. but according to our condition, it tastes different. Unless we are cured of this diseased conception of bodily life, we cannot taste the sweetness of spiritual life. Indeed, it will taste bitter to us. So this is the reason why many conditioned souls, especially those self-proclaimed intellectuals, they often propagate this foolish notion that those who are engaged in spiritual life, they are actually wasting their time. They try to undermine the importance of spiritual life by saying that uh, people who are in spiritual life, they are all wasting their time. Actually, uh, uh, it is the exact opposite of what they say. Only those who are obsessed with material wealth, only they are wasting their time. Because we know from the authentic scriptures like Bhagavatam, it is clearly stated that the Kali Jivas have very limited time. So the more we waste our time by being obsessed with material wealth, it is not going to solve our real problems. Since we have obtained this wonderful opportunity in this human form of life, it is best that we try to optimize the amount of time we have and be engaged in spiritual inquiry and to accumulate spiritual knowledge. So, without realizing that, we can never cure our material disease. So, for those who are extremely obsessed with material opulence and material wealth, so for them, spiritual life will only taste bitter. And it is also important for for such people to understand uh, the severity of this material disease. I'll just give an example which I observed from last year. There's actually a famous actor, a Telugu actor. His name is Mahesh Babu. So he belongs to a family from the film industry, from the Telugu film industry. And in the year 2022, if I'm not mistaken, in January 2022, his elder brother passed away. Then in August or September the same year, his mother passed away. And in December 2022, his father passed away. So in the same year, in throughout 2022, he had to witness three devastating losses. So he is actually a very famous actor, and we know that all these film personalities, they are extremely rich, but regardless of the amount of material wealth that they have, they can never bring back their loved ones, and they are also forced to undergo this. We are all forced to undergo these uh, tough phases in our material life, and it is really not worth going through these same devastating experiences in different bodies. So it is actually wiser if we try to liberate ourselves from all these suffering. So that's why those who think that material wealth is everything, they are miserably mistaken, because no matter how much material wealth that they accumulate, they can never use their material wealth to bring back their loved ones who have died. So for such people, indeed, spiritual life will taste bitter for them. At the same time, by increasing our enjoyment of material life, we are further complicating our disease condition. A typhoid patient cannot eat solid food, and if someone gives it to him to enjoy and he eats it, he is further complicating his malady and is endangering his life. If we really want freedom from the miseries of material existence, we must minimize our bodily demands and pleasures. So again, it is related to the basic fact of self-realization, that we can never satisfy ourself, our true self, which is the spirit soul, through material sense gratification. So the only way is to reduce the bodily demands and focus more on satisfying ourselves through devotional service, because only by devotional service we can satisfy our Supreme Father. Only when he is satisfied, only then we can attain satisfaction for our spirit soul. So that's all for today. We'll continue with the remainder in the upcoming sessions. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Hare Krishna.